Share Conference presents George Hotz.
Hey, my name is George Hotz. I play a character GeoHot on the internet. And I have 3 stories to tell you today. I never know how technical to make these talks, so if you have any technical questions, ask them at Q&A. How we disrupted the mobile ecosystem. Oh, if you make a little post-it note thingy, it only shows up in your slides. So this is the iPhone. The iPhone came out June 28th, 2007, 6 p.m. Was anybody at that launch? I was in the US. It was a big deal. There were long lines at the Apple store. People were there all day. My girlfriend from high school just broke up with me. It was my senior year, and I wanted something to do that summer, take my mind off her. So I bought one of these. It was the biggest consumer product ever. Super hyped, and the hype was justified. There's now over 100 million iPhones in the world. So I get this thing, comes in a little box, open it up, and it says slide for emergency, and you can only make emergency calls. And we see I had T-Mobile, and the iPhone came out, and it only worked on AT&T, so I put my T-Mobile SIM card in, and it doesn't work. I don't like that. I don't like when companies tell me what I could do with products that I've purchased. So, first off, you can't even use the phone. Phone comes up, all you can do is make emergency calls. There was this barrier called activation, and you'd plug your iPhone into iTunes and you get this activation screen. Let's get started. Activate your iPhone with AT&T. Definitely not. So, first thing you do when you're reverse engineering a device like this is you're like, how does the device communicate with the outside world? What kind of corrupt input, or even sometime allowed input, can I send to the device to make it do what I want? Well, it turned out that I wasn't the first one to answer the question for activation. This was answered by a guy named DVD John, who was the first guy to release, he released Dexys he broke the CSS content scrambling on DVDs. And he released this proxy server that would essentially, when the iPhone would activate and say, this is a valid iPhone for AT&T, it would send this packet to the server. The server would be like, yeah, sure, you're a valid iPhone. Here you go. Here's your validation key. Well, it turns out that these validation keys were not actually checked on the phone at all. You could send another phone's validation key to your phone, and it would be validated. So I made a proxy server, simple replay attack. We reverse engineered iTunes mobile device .dll. It's a library on Windows that has all these functions that communicate with the iPhone. The function was called AM Device Activate. You call AM Device Activate. And July 6th, we came out with a product to bypass activation. By product, I mean a free download on the internet. Jailbreak. We invented this word. I mean, it was a word, but jailbreak means get out of jail. 5 years ago, who knew what a jailbreak was? And it's funny, you can, people on the street now know what the word jailbreak means, and this was not a word 5 years ago. So, first jailbreak that comes out is a very text-based thing. It used this little program I wrote called G-Shell. My name is George, so I put a G in front of shell. And this would talk to iTunes mobile device DLL, and you could send all these commands to the iPhone. And jailbreaking was really easy back in the old days. It just involved copying a few files around. You'll talk about the etymology of this word. People don't know. It comes from, there's a daemon on the iPhone, still today, called AFC. It's Apple's file system sharing thing that lets iTunes put music on it, and it's restricted or jailed to a directory that only allows user files, music, movies, not even ringtones back in the day. So the jailbreak literally moved the jail from a jail to the root directory, which was the entire phone. And the first thing people did with this was put ringtones on their iPhone. You couldn't do it. Apple didn't allow it at first. Who needs a ringtone? Steve Jobs doesn't believe you need choice. So a bit after these jailbreaks come out, we released this app called Installer. And what Installer was the precursor to the modern App Store. For the first time on really any mobile device, at least that I can remember, you could pick applications you wanted to install on that device. A little app called Installer. This guy from Null River Software is the one who released it. When the iPhone first came out, Apple only wanted web apps. Steve Jobs is like, you want to code for the iPhone? HTML5. Well, we made native apps. Some of the first native apps were like NES emulators and little games, and you could set your iPhone up as a Wi-Fi hotspot to tether it. It's pretty cool. Everybody jailbroke back then, pretty much, who had an iPhone. Well, not everybody, but a third of the iPhones out there were jailbroken because, well, you had to if you wanted any other apps except for the 10 that Apple included. This wasn't enough for me. I still couldn't use the phone with T-Mobile. There's two processors inside the iPhone. There's an application processor and a baseband. The application processor runs the apps. The baseband talks to the cell tower. I wanted to unlock the phone, allow it to work with SIM cards other than AT&T SIM cards. And the background I come from, I didn't know much about software, but I knew a lot about hardware. And I could open the phone up and saw that this chip was this baseband, and I Googled what the baseband chip was, and I looked at the flash chip that was connected to it. And all you need to do to unlock this phone is find the if statement that says in the code, if carrier equals AT&T, work, else don't work. That's it. Just change it to else work. That's all you got to do. It's a 1-byte change. And that's what I really like about this stuff. All you got to do is change 1 byte, and you can make a huge difference to the functioning of a device. So the end of August, my team and I come out with the first unlock of the iPhone in the world. Hardware unlock. You had to open the thing up, and the way it worked is you would take an address line of the flash chip and pull it high to trick the iPhone into reading a different part of flash than it was expecting. And if this part of flash was blank, it would let you run whatever code you wanted. So we could run this code, and we could send the right commands to unlock it. And I had a phone on T-Mobile. You see a YouTube video. I hadn't slept in like 48 hours, drank a lot of energy drinks back in the day, me holding the phone up. Like, this is the world's first unlocked iPhone. Well, it was cool. I was 17 at the time, ended up getting on TV and stuff, traded the second unlocked iPhone. I kept the first one. This girl dropped it at a party and it broke. But second one, traded for a sports car. I had a Nissan 350Z for a while. Don't recommend that car. I watched the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift, and I thought it was all cool getting one of those. Beginning of September, these 6 guys released For Money, a software unlock out of nowhere. 2 days, me and a bunch of other guys reverse engineered it and got a free one out there. And this means you didn't even have to open the phone to unlock it anymore. And that was cool. But like I said, we disrupted the mobile ecosystem. The first iPhone was sold at Apple stores for $500. I could put $500 cash down on the counter, plus tax. And they would hand you an iPhone. And this was unprecedented in the US mobile market. In the Europe mobile market, I think it was pretty much standard fare. But in the US mobile market, you bought the phone through the carrier, and they would subsidize it. Well, the iPhone was sold at retail outlets. You didn't have to sign up for a contract. You bought the phone. You took it home and signed up for a contract, or didn't if you unlocked it. And about a third of the first generation iPhones ever made were never registered with AT&T. They were shipped all over the world. But the iPhone 3G comes out, and they put a stop. Well, they didn't put a stop to this stuff technically, but they released the App Store. It's very possible that if it wasn't for the jailbreaks a year ago, there would have been no App Store. Apple may not have had plans. Who knows what really goes on in Apple. But if you remember, App Stores today are taken for granted. But before the iPhone, you would download, like if you had a PDA, you'd download the apps on your computer, and then you'd use ActiveSync to transfer them over. This was horrible. So iPhone 3G comes out, $200. Wow, it's $300 cheaper. But no, it's $200 because you had to sign a contract at the store, and it has the App Store. So jailbreaking and unlocking continued, but to nowhere near the impact that they had on the first iPhone. And who knows how much the mobile ecosystem is what it is today because of, the first iPhone and the people that messed with it. So, I dropped out of college. Thought I was all clever doing this. Don't drop out of college. Got an internship at Google, and I was like, well, why should I go to college for 4 years if I'm just going to get a job at Google when I leave? But I ended up quitting Google 6 months later. 18, living away from home, thinking you're going to start a career. It didn't work out for me. So I became infamous on the internet. I make it rain. How many people have used one of the rain jailbreaks? So the iPhone 3GS comes out, middle of 2009. I'm living in Boston at the time. I camped out at the store, rainy night in Boston with these two guys who were playing cards. Bought an iPhone 3GS, called in sick to work the next day, and started working on the first jailbreak for it. And I found this exploit where you could, iBoot is the bootloader on the iPhone, and it had this parser which let you use environment variables, similar to how in Bash you can put $ in an environment variable and it'll expand it out. Well, when it would expand it out, it wouldn't check the size of the buffer, so you had an overflow on the heap. By messing with the malloc structs, or in my case, the next thing was a ring buffer, I could write a byte to an arbitrary point in memory, hijack control of the device, and jailbreak it. And this jailbreak was called Purple Rain. See, the dev team, they released snow jailbreaks. They had yellow snow and red snow, so I was like, rain. Purple Rain. And these continued. Black Rain was the next one I released about 4 months later. Black Rain used an exploit. There's an exploit in iBoot where if you sent a certain USB packet, it would do a mem copy to address 0. And, well, ARM, in their brilliance, puts the exception vectors at address 0. So you could overwrite the exception vectors on the system, namely the IRQ exception vector and hijack control. And with a bit of clever code, you can reload those bytes you corrupted and get code execution and eventually do a full jailbreak. 21 million downloads. Pretty happy about that. Lime Rain. Came out with Lime Rain next. Lime Rain is still in use today because the exploit is not in software Apple can update. In the iPhone 4, actually the iPod Touch 4 and below, there's an exploit in the boot ROM, and the ROM is ROM read-only memory. Apple cannot change this, so if you have an iPod Touch 4 or below today, you can still jailbreak it. And it's because of this Lime Rain exploit. So it was cool that it was in the boot ROM. The only reason I released it is because these other guys wanted to release a jailbreak, and I wanted to beat them to it. So I started getting good at this reversing stuff. I did contracting around that time, too. I did a lot of the low-end cell phone unlocks were my work as contract jobs. But, you know, low-end cell phones aren't exciting. This was exciting. Sony's PlayStation 3, this dude sent me a PlayStation 3 in at the end of 2008, and he's like, yeah, just play around with it. You know, nobody's touched it in 2 years. Well, 2 became 3, and still nobody had touched it. And the PS3 was pretty cool. It used to let you run Linux. Doesn't let you anymore. Sony does not like you. But it used to let you run Linux. You could install Linux, and it would run under the hypervisor. Now, this was good enough for most people, and it was good enough for me for a long time. I played with it for a bit. You know, not that cool. It's another Linux box. The only cores you could you get access to the whole CPU architecture on that thing. Most of the power that people use is in this PPC element. And the PPC is not a great architecture for a lot of reasons. But so nobody touched this in 3 years. I wanted access to the GPU, and this is how this all started. How do I get access inside the hypervisor on the PS3? To make a long story short, the hypervisor they used was written by IBM. IBM writes great code. For every line they wrote in that hypervisor, they probably had 10 lines documenting why it was secure. It was secure for data centers in remote, faraway places where nobody could touch the physical hardware. But I could touch the physical hardware. I opened the thing up, put a wire on the memory bus, and if I glitched the memory bus when it was doing a page table write back, I could trick the hypervisor into thinking it removed entries from the page table that it didn't, and with these corrupt entries, I could then bootstrap my way to full control of the PlayStation 3, but full control was not cool. I released this exploit, and people were like, wait, where's my piracy? So it's not piracy. No, this is just about getting access to the hypervisor of your PS3. So people didn't like me in that scene. I still think people don't. So Sony then removes Linux, and people blamed me for it, and, well. Months later, I released the first jailbreak for the PS3. You can go in, you can run an update file, and then you can run homebrew applications, not piracy, but you could run homebrew applications. I also released the MetLoader key, which was the highest level key inside the PlayStation 3. These guys, Fail Overflow at Chaos Computer Club, found out that they majorly screwed up their asymmetric cryptography. In such a way, when they generated random numbers, they generated a random number once when you were supposed to generate a random number every time, and because of that, you could derive their private key. So that, combined with this exploit I found in the MetLoader to get the symmetric key, I could get access to everything about how the system works. It's long and it's boring and it's technical about how it works. But the PlayStation 3 was owned, and Sony was not happy about that. So on January 11th, I get a call. I can't talk about the lawsuit. I got sued by Sony. But I did write a rap song about it. I think I'll perform it for you guys here. You know what? I have copyright on this rap song. That's a right to performance, Sony. Yo, it's GeoHot. For those that don't know, I got sued by Sony last year. Let's take this out of the courtroom and into the streets. I'm a beast, at the least you'll face me in the Northeast. Get my ire up, light my fire. I'll go harder than Eminem went at Mariah. Call me a liar, pound me in the ass with no lube chafing. You're fucking with the dude who got the keys to your safe end. Those that can't do bring suits. Cry to your Uncle Sam to settle disputes. Thought you tackle this with a little more tact, but then again, fudge packers, I don't know jack. I shed a tear every time I think a lick sang. But shit, man, they're a corporation. I'm a personification of freedom for all. You fill dockets like that's a concept foreign to y'all. The lawyers muddy water and TROs stall. Out of business is jail for me, and you're suing me civilly. Exhibit this in the courtroom. Go on, do it. I dare you. Thank you. I used to want to be a computer programmer when I was little. Now I either want to be a rapper or a superhero. I think those things are pretty hard, though. So that's the lawsuit summarized in a minute. And this is Sony's share price. At the beginning there is when they started suing me, and at the end here, they'd lost about half their value. $20 billion in valuation destroyed in a year. Now, I don't claim to take credit for that, but, you know, I like laughing at my enemy's misfortune. They say companies are first run by engineers, then they're run by accountants, then they're run by lawyers, then they're out of business. All right, well, you know what? I have a permanent injunction. I'm not allowed to hack any Sony products. Well, I don't think it'll matter in 10 years when Sony goes out of business. So, let's talk about what's new and exciting, the final frontier of reverse engineering. I gave a talk at South by Southwest with this title. I got pretty bored of these phone unlock jobs and these game console things because if I set my mind to it, I could do it. It's a lot of tedious work. So I went on to a field that I know nothing about. I didn't do well in high school, dropped out of college. But this is the stuff that always interested me. Human brain. We have 38 petaflops of compute power in our head, 3.6 petabytes of storage, and our brains use 20 watts of power. This is as much compute power that is in many modern data centers, in each and every one of your heads. In 2011, we crossed a really critical threshold. The amount of silicon compute power in the world became equal to one human brain. We are still a lot smarter than the computers. The human brain is the most sophisticated thing we know about in the universe, right? The stars aren't that complicated. The stuff in our head is complicated. It was built by, so everything I reverse engineered to date was built by men. This is built by God, by the aliens, by a really sick genetic algorithm, depending on how you look at it. You know, Ray Kurzweil's got a book called The Singularity is Near. I look at it like this. Let's see, I got 1 minute left. The complexity of the things we're building is approaching one, where I define one as the complexity of a single human brain. And if these trends that Kurzweil loves to talk about continue, we'll eventually get computers that are as powerful not only as one human brain, but as powerful as the entire human race. And there's a law called Moore's Law, which says that compute power doubles every 18 months, which means that the human race doubles compute power every 18 months. So if the computers have the same compute power as the human race, they can double their own compute power in every 18 months, but then they have double the power and can double it in 9 months, 4.5 months, and in 36 months you have singularity. When I was 15, I read like Eliezer Yudkowsky and stuff. Great reading on the internet. Also read Gödel, Escher, Bach. I really recommend it. Consciousness is strange. You are Turing computable by the things we believe today, meaning you can be computed. I have 15 seconds. You can be computed on a modern computer. How does it feel to be a web server? I mean, we talk about how we're conscious and we have this epiphenomenon of experience, but how does it feel to be a web server? To sum it up, I want a metacortex. I want to be able to lay back in a chair, have someone plug something into the back of my head and say, I know Kung Fu. I'm thinking about ways to actually approach this problem. I gave a talk at South by Southwest. It's on the internet. I have ideas about how to approach it, but like I said, I don't know shit about this, so who knows how they are. But I'll leave you with this. The brain is a supercomputer, and the fastest way we have to get information in is by reading and out is by typing. That's slower than dial-up internet. You are a supercomputer with slower than dial-up internet. So I want a metacortex. Questions, my Q&A sessions after this. I'll put the slides up on my website, churchofsingularity.com. And if you want to contact me, geohotplusshare@gmail.com.